Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Maximizing GP with Purchasing Modules for Distribution. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us. There are a couple of housekeeping items we'd like to mention before we begin the presentation. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please submit them through the GoToWebinar question box, and we will be answering questions following the presentation. We are also recording today's webinar. You will see a recording in our follow-up email tomorrow. I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Todd Mcdaniel. Todd is a partner at Dynavistics, a Microsoft partner and software development company. He currently manages the development of sales and operations for Dynavistics, including the design of new software features, production and sales of sales collateral, management of partnership relationships, and customer relationship management. So at this point, Todd, I believe we're ready to transition the presentation over to you to get started.
Okay, thank you very much. So again, my name is Todd McDaniel. I am with Dynavistics, and I am going to be talking to you today about some of our purchasing modules. So we have been doing the add-ons for Microsoft Dynamics GP for almost 20 years now. We primarily specialize in distribution modules. So anything involving SOP, POP, or inventory, we can help you with. We have about 30 different modules that we add on to GP. So a couple of our modules that we originally developed were bought by Great Plains a long time ago. So if you use extended pricing, advanced distribution, or available to promise, you already use one of our modules. It's just part of the core GP product now. So with no further ado, I'm going to talk a little bit about our purchasing products. So we have, and I'm going to jump right into the demo here. So we have a couple different products that we're going to cover today, our Advanced Inventory Replenishment product, and then our Vendor Price Management product. So and it looks like my virtual machine decided to reboot for me, so that was great. So our Advanced Inventory Replenishment is an add-on that allows you to calculate the order point and order up to quantities and safety stock for your items based on historical sales trends, historical sales quantities, and future sales forecasts. So that module is primarily used for high volume distribution companies, and we use the purchase order generator that comes core with GP and add functionality to it to make it work better. The second one that I'm going to talk about today is our Vendor Price Management module, which is still our best-selling module. The Vendor Price Management module gives you the ability to store price sheets and pricing information for your vendors and for upcoming purchase orders. So as many of you know, if you've used GP for any period of time, there's no place in GP to store what you're going to pay the vendor next time for an item. So the system will tell you what you paid last time. It'll tell you your average cost. It'll tell you your FIFO cost, but it's not going to tell you what you are going to pay next time. So that's what our modules do, is provide that information. So I'm going to start off by looking at some core GP information, and then from there I'm going to talk about what we add to it and what's available through our system. So for those of you that have worked with GP, and especially with the purchase order generator, you know that it primarily runs off of the item resource planning window. And the item resource planning window allows you to set the order point quantity and the order up to level by item by site. So the way the Pio Generator works out of the box is it looks at this item every time you run it. If this item is at or below 539, it's going to prompt you to place a purchase order to bring it up to 1,311. So obviously the first question that everybody asks when you show them this is, great, how do I know what numbers to put in those two fields? So at the end of the day, that's what our system does. I'm going to show you a lot of things and a lot of features around that. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to get the most accurate, most timely information available so you can make the best decision about what numbers should go in those two fields. All right. So I'm going to skip over to our primary window here. So the primary window that we use is called the demand review window. And the demand review is where your planners or your purchasing people will be working. So we always kind of start this demo by saying this system is not intended in any way to replace your purchasing people. What we're trying to do is we're trying to present the best information we can to them, the most timely information to help them make the best decisions. So the way this module is structured to work is the demand review is where your users operate when they're looking at planning their inventory. So this is before they're going to make any purchases. This is just talking about, okay, what do I need to look at? What decisions do I make about my order points and order up tos based on my demand? So in this screen, I start off by having my item number and my item description. I can do some filtering before I look at this. And the idea here is that we want to filter and only show the things that the user needs to see or wants to see. So they can filter by site, by vendor, by calculation method, which we'll talk about in a minute. I can filter down by buyer or even by inventory category. So after that, I can show up to 18 periods of demand. So a period in our system can be a month, a 4-week period, or it can be weekly demand. So it just depends on what type of volume you're dealing with and how you typically track your demand. So then the next question becomes, okay, well, what is demand? So we actually provide you some details on how we calculate that demand. So obviously the first part of the demand is the GP sales order demand. So you'll see the transactions here, the number of transactions, and the GP the amounts that were sold each period. In my case, I'm using calendar months as my periods. So once I have that, there are other ways that I can consume inventory and that I want to take into account in this historical demand. So if you use inventory bill of materials or assembly transactions, those are going to show up in this column here called assembly, and it's going to add to the demand that's in the calculation for historical demand. We also allow you to import demand. So we have an import utility in Wizard that allows you to import demand from anywhere else. So this can be used if you have an outside system that consumes inventory, maybe a retail system or some sort of manufacturing system, and you want to bring that demand in and use it for your purchasing, you can do that. The next thing we have is inherited transactions. So this is another way to increase your demand. You can use this a couple different ways. The primary use of inherited transactions is if you have an item that is superseding a previous item, so a new model number, a new specification, something like that. Rather than waiting for the demand to build up on that new item and start purchasing, the inherited demand allows you to inherit a portion or all of the demand from the previous item, and then you can start purchasing based on that previous item's demand. We also have customers that use this to when they add new items to a product line. So let's say you're adding a new flavor, you're adding a new color, you can inherit part of the demand from some other flavor or color within that product line and start using that as your basis for purchasing the new item. The next thing that we have is lost sales. So just being honest, GP does not do a great job of tracking lost sales. So we have a couple different ways that you can track that number in our system. One is very simple. You can just type in a number there of an estimate of what you think was lost sales on that item. So lost sales are where you could not sell something because you didn't have it in stock. We also have a table that we insert records into whenever you run out of stock on an item. And then we insert a record when the stock is replenished. So you can see how long you were out of an item and make some educated guesses as to perhaps the lost sales quantities because you were out of that particular item. Then the last column is exceptional sales. So exceptional sales are things that you do not expect to recur or transactions amounts that you do not want to have to be used in your calculation to determine your order points and order up tos. So some examples would be where you run a special and you sell an unusual amount. Maybe you have a client that opens up a new store or starts a new project, and they take an unusually large quantity, then you would want to put that in as exceptional demand so you didn't purchase for that in the future. So we can actually go one level deeper on this data. So if I'm looking at my demand here and I see a relatively large month, like this 870, I can actually drill in and see the transactions that make up that. So I can see whether they were inherited or regular transactions. I can even maybe scroll down and see that I have this one here that's 60. I could drill into the document number if I want to go down to that level. I can see who purchased it. I can maybe even contact the salesperson, say, is this something you think is going to happen on a regular basis? If they say no, this was unusual, then I may want to go ahead and mark this as exceptional right at the transaction level. So I may say, you know what, 45 of those were exceptional, and I'm going to bring that down to just 15 as the normal demand for this customer. Now, the system in no way expects that you're going to get down to that level of granularity for every item, every site. So this is just something that's available. If you see some anomalies or you have questions about a particular calculation, you can drill down to this level and be able to get more information about where you're at for this item. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. And we'll get out of the demand details. So once I have my demand and what I want to use as my calculations, and so far we're talking about strictly historical demand, then I can have the system start giving some suggested quantities that it thinks I'm going to sell in the future. So to do that, we have 15 different calculation methods that the system will run through as part of the analysis, and it'll say, okay, based on historical sales, this calculation method would work best for predicting future results. So if I go and look at those list of calculation methods, you'll see that we have some very standard calculation methods, like 3-period rolling average, 6-period rolling average, basic ones like that. And then we have much more advanced ones that take into account things like seasonality and trends. So you may have a calculation method that says it's a 3-period rolling average with a plus or minus trend, for example. You can also have seasonal methods that are as simple as year ago, upcoming 3. So we always use the example of pool chlorine, even though that doesn't really work as an example here in Florida. But for example, in Michigan, if it's April, you don't want to be stocking pool chlorine based on your sales from January, February, March. You would rather be stocking based on your sales from May, June, July of the previous year. So it'll look at that demand and it'll apply that seasonal method. We can also get more complicated with seasonal trends. We can have seasonal weighted averages. So it gives more weight to the most recent months versus more historical months, or more weight to last year's versus this year's, or this year's versus last year's. So there's lots of different things. But again, the system's going to do all this automatically, and it's going to present what it thinks is the best calculation method. Now, again, like I said from the beginning, we're not trying to replace purchasing people. We're not trying to take the decisions out of their hands. So if they look at an item and they say that they see that the system is saying this is a trending item or a seasonal item, they can override that. They don't have to use that calculation method. In addition, the system also provides a forecast error percentage to prompt the user to let them know how good the system thinks that estimate is. All right. So the lower the percentage here, the better the system thinks the estimate is. So if you get a high one here, like this 70+%, the system's saying, you know what, we used a 6-period rolling average here. We think it's going to sell 207 next period, but this is telling me that it's not a very good estimate. And if you look at the history on this item, you can see why. It was 150, 230, 540, 40, 280, 0. It's all over the map. So the system is telling you right away that there's a high forecast error. So this is important because if I'm a planner or a purchasing agent, these are the things that I'm looking at that I want to spend time on, all right? The high moving consistent items, those are easy to predict. They're easy to stock for. It's the anomalies that you want your users to focus on and make sure that they're they're identifying. So in this case, I have an A item that has a relatively high forecast error percentage. So I want to take a little time and analyze that further. Our item ranking is based on hits. So in this case, an A item means that this item is sold quite often across a number of customers. So from there, I can then start using that estimated period demand to do my calculations to get to order point and order up to. So if I open up my line point maintenance screen here, you can see how I can start using these numbers. I'm going to change this value real quick for a second so that we can be a little more realistic. So for this item, from this site, from this vendor, the first thing I'm going to calculate is my safety stock. So again, safety stock is stock that I hope I never have to use. I should only have to use this stock if I have an unusually high sales or my vendor is late delivering, then I would have to dip into my safety stock. So in my case, I've said that I want 2 weeks, 14 days of safety stock on hand. So the system's going to take my average weekly demand of 155. It's going to multiply that by 2. It's going to give me safety stock of 311. So I've now taken those quantity numbers, put some time elements to them, and came up with a number that, based on historical demand and the desire I have of how much safety stock, I've come up with the 311. The next thing that I have is order point. So my order point is made up of my safety stock, which we did up above, and my vendor lead time, which in my case is 10 days or 1.429 weeks. So as you know, GP stores vendor lead time by item by vendor, and it calculates the average lead time. Now we use the planning lead time. We have a utility screen that allows you to look at average lead time and then make changes if you desire to update planning lead time. The reason for that is average lead time is calculated as the time between the date the PO was released and the date of the first receipt for that PO. The problem with that is if you have a vendor that normally takes 10 days to deliver to you, but occasionally they ship you something overnight, the system is going to average those all together, and it's going to start bringing that lead time down based on those overnight shipments. So we use planning lead time to make it a little more consistent lead time. So I take my safety stock, 2 weeks, my week and a half basically of lead time, times my weekly demand, and it's giving me an order point in that case of 533. So that means when this item hits 533 or less, purchase order generator is going to prompt me to create a purchase order for that item for that site. Now, the next question is, okay, once I hit that 533, how do I know how much I need to purchase from that point? So this can be calculated a number of different ways. So you can start with a very rudimentary basic calculation, which says I'm going to tell the system how many days I want to have as my maximum stock, so the old min-max calculation. So in this case, I've said 49 days. So I want 7 weeks as kind of my max plus lead time. So it's going to take that up to 8.429. So it's going to tell me that I need to order up to 1,311. So when I hit 533, it's going to prompt me to place an order for right around 800. While that 800 is coming in during my 10 days lead time, it'll drift down towards 311, and then the whole cycle will start over again. So that's kind of a basic rudimentary way of calculating how much you want to order once you hit the order point. Now, we can make that a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more based on the activity of the item. So we can use line point, which is something we add to GP and can be used in the purchase order generator. So line point is made up of your minimum week stock, so your safety stock, plus your lead time. And then it takes into account how often you want to or you can order from this vendor. So in my case, I've said that I can or I want to order from this vendor every 2 weeks. So it adds all those time periods up, multiplies it by my weekly demand for this item, and it comes up with 844. So that's telling me when I hit 533, I could order about 310. While that's getting here, I'd probably I'd get ready to order another purchase order 2 weeks later, and I would be on a much shorter, tighter cycle of that item. All right. Now, this also works the other way. So if you have a vendor, maybe it's an overseas vendor that has lead time, but it also has restrictions on how often you can order, maybe based on shipping schedules or something like that. You could say, you know what, I can only order from this vendor once every quarter or every 13 weeks. So I can save that. And then that's going to take me all the way up to over 2,500 on this line point. So it's going to say based on that vendor frequency, you're going to need to order more in order to stay in stock on this item. All right. So that's the basics of how I get to my safety stock order point and my order up to or line point based strictly on historical demand. Now, we can take this one step further, and this is optional, but we can do sales forecast or we can do future-looking forecast. So anywhere I have an item that has this little graph next to it, that tells me that I have a forecast in place. My forecasts can be input manually, or they can be imported. We have a forecast import wizard that you can walk through. So my forecast can be adjusted 3 different ways. So the first way is with a percentage growth. That percentage growth can be positive or negative. So I could say I expect I'm going to sell 10% more of this year than last year, and I can factor that in. Or I could say perhaps this is an older item. It's something that we're phasing out, and I could start winding down the item over time and start having less and less and bringing that quantity down. Now, the other thing that I could do is I can import an exceptional forecast. And the exceptional forecast is an exceptional sale. So the system, you're telling the system I'm going to run a promotion. My sales department has told me that I'm going to sell 1,500 more of these than normal. I have done my normal adjustment of sales expectations, and I'm going to order 600 more than what I would normally order. So the system will order ahead of time, so you have plenty in stock, and then it'll go right back to ordering based on historical sales after that. You can also just bring in a flat forecast amount. So if you're in an industry where you get really good sales forecasts from your customers, you can tabulate those and summarize those and bring those in here and purchase based strictly on those flat amounts, ignoring historical sales completely. Okay. So again, the demand review screen is where my planners, my purchasing agents go to start looking at the items and modifying how I'm going to purchase those items in the future. From here, I can filter that down like we talked about by item or by vendor, by site, but I can also filter it by rank and by error percentage. So that will tell me if maybe I only want to look at my A items every week, my B items every month, and my C and D items, I just kind of let them take care of themselves. Or maybe I only want to look at my A items where my average forecast error is a certain percentage, so I can narrow that down. The other thing that the system does is it is constantly recalculating these amounts. So you'll see here this item that I have highlighted. Right now, I'm purchasing this item based on a current EPD of 729. Based on sales right up to this moment, the system has recalculated and said you're actually selling this at a rate where you're going to sell 798 per period. So you have a 9.5% variance between the number you're using currently for purchasing and the most up-to-date number. Now, we don't change that number automatically. Obviously, you're going to have fluctuations. Your demand, unless you're extremely blessed, is not going to be perfectly level and consistent. So you wouldn't want to change that estimate every time you sold an item or you didn't sell an item for a couple of days. But we do give you the ability to see how much the up-to-the-date current forecast is different than the most recently used forecast. And you can even filter down and say, you know what, I only want to see things that are maybe more than 10% or more than 20%, whatever kind of makes sense for your industry. All right. So once that's all done, I've set everything up. I'm ready. I've put all the information in for my order points and order up tos. I've updated all the items I want to update. Now I'm ready to do my purchasing. So in some companies, this is 2 completely separate departments. In some companies, this is 1 person that does the whole thing. But what we do is we use as much as possible of the purchase order generator that comes with GP, and then we add some functionality around it to make it better, faster, stronger. So if I go into the purchase order generator here, excuse me, you'll see that we added a couple checkboxes here to the screen when you first come into purchase order generator. So we allow you to include 0 quantity required. We think that's important because you may have items that you don't need right now, but in order to meet a vendor minimum, you want to see them in purchase order generator in case you want to throw a couple cases on just to get you over the minimum. So you can include those in the purchase order generator. We also allow you to do vendor groups. So as you can see in the purchase order generator, you can restrict or run this by item number, site, buyer ID, vendor ID, or item class ID. The vendor ID can be a range, but it's got to be in alphabetical order. And a lot of times that's not the way you do your vendor groups. So if you want to run this for a specific group of vendors, you can put them in vendor groups and then choose which groups you want to run this time when you run purchase order generator. So some industries still run different vendors on different days of the week. You can group them that way. You can group them by product line. You group them however you want. You can run that purchase order generator for just those groups of vendors. And then the last checkbox here is if you want to use line point instead of order up to, which is what we discussed in the demand review, so that you can take into account your vendor frequency and how often you want to order from the vendor. So I'm going to go ahead and run my purchase order generator and come back with my results. And I'm going to show you a couple other screens here that we've added to purchase order generator. So the first thing you'll notice is I got this little pop-up window over here to the side, and that is going to give me a lot more information about an item when I'm looking at an item to purchase. So if I look at, trying to find this Z-102, you'll see over here on the right-hand side, I have a lot of the same information that I had in the demand review. So again, we're allowing the system to suggest a purchase order quantity of 48 cases, but we're also giving the purchasing person a lot more detail so they may alter or change that decision right from here. So the first thing we do is we present some of the demand information that we had on the previous window. So I can see the last 7 months demand. I can do the same thing and drill into the detail of that demand and see all the information behind how I calculated that. The system is requiring 48. I can drill in and see where that 48 came from. So I can see how many I have on hand available. Right now, I have 60 available. I need 540, so that's 480. But I ordered this in cases of 10, so the system is recommending 48 cases of 10. All right. I can also see over here, I've added a couple columns to the purchase order generator, which tells me how many I sell per week, my minimum weeks of stock, how much that is, and then the number of weeks I have on hand right now. So again, this is because I may be presenting items that don't need to be ordered right now. So I could see if they didn't need to be ordered right now, perhaps how many weeks of stock I had in case I wanted to add something to meet a minimum. You'll also see that I have some little warnings over here. So on this item here, the Z102, it's telling me I need 48, but it's also giving me a warning, and it's letting me know that I am overstocked at another site. So I may decide not to purchase this, but to do a transfer instead. So if I drill into the available at other sites, I'll see all the sites, and I can see how many are available, and I can also see how many weeks of stock that is on hand, so that I can maybe make a decision to do a transfer instead of a purchase order on this item. All right. Also from this window, I can drill in and see my available to promise information. I can drill into my item stock information and see all of the transactions and things that have happened on this item within a specific time period. I can go straight to the item inquiry here. So again, we're presenting as much information as possible. I can drill in and see what purchase orders are outstanding for this item right now and the due dates on when they're supposed to be here. And I can hopefully make the best purchasing decision possible right from this screen. Now, the next thing that I'm going to talk about is the vendor price module. So the vendor price management module comes with our advanced inventory replenishment if you buy advanced inventory replenishment, or it can be purchased separately. So like I mentioned at the beginning of the call, the vendor price management module is because GP does not do a great job of allowing you to store what you're going to pay a vendor for an item next time. So we allow you to input or import price sheets by vendor, by item, by date, and by quantity. So the system will take all of that into account when it's putting a price on a purchase order. And that purchase order can be created through the Pio Generator or through standard manual purchase order entry. So first of all, you'll see here on the right-hand side, anywhere there's a V, that means that I have a vendor price sheet available for this item. So if I drill in here to this unit cost, this little blue arrow, it's going to tell me what the vendor price is that I have available for that item and the effective dates. Now, I could also have quantity breaks available, and I could also have date-based pricing. So if I had an F next to that V, it would tell me that I have a future price change coming up based on the date-based, and that may again change how I'm going to purchase this item. So if the price is going up next month, I may purchase a little extra this month so that I have a lower overall cost of inventory. So, and we're going to drill in more about the vendor pricing here in a second. But the other thing that we add to the screen because of the vendor price module is we also give you vendor totals. So one of the nice things about using Pio Generator is you can do purchase orders for multiple vendors at one time. But standard Pio Gen, you can't see what the total is by vendor from the Pio Generator. So we give you by vendor the target order, which you can store as either weight or quantity, how much you've purchased so far based on this purchase order generator, and what the difference is. And then we also have the vendor minimum dollar order here and how much you've purchased so far, so you can see if you've met the minimums or not. All right. So vendor pricing is a very easy to set up and easy to use module. I'm going to switch over and show you a little bit about how that's set up and populated. And again, it works with both the purchase order generator and manual purchase order entry. So the vendor pricing allows you by vendor and each item that's attached to that vendor to add items to the to their price sheet. Whoops. And you can do contracts or you can do non-contracts. The contracts are just ways of grouping the price. So I'm going to go ahead and choose this contract. So in this case, I've added all of these items to this vendor price sheet. And this contract is in effect from 1/1/2017 to 12/31/2017. So for each item on this vendor price sheet, I can then add one or more prices based on quantities. So in this case, if I purchase the Z100 item from this vendor during 2017 and I buy 12 of them, the price is going to default to $14 on that item. All right. And then if I went up to 20, it would go down to $13. So you can set those up manually, and you can have multiple contracts in place for a single vendor. So if you notice when I did the vendor contract, I also had a special price coming up. I have a quarter 3 and 4 price coming up. And so that may be for certain items, I may have a reduced price coming up or a price increase. I can load that ahead of time, and then the system will use it as soon as that effective date kicks in. Again, these can be loaded manually, or they can be loaded through a routine and a wizard. So if I go over here to the wizard and I go to the vendor pricing, I do a price wizard, and I get an Excel error. And this allows me to import or export the vendor pricing. So for those of you that are in industries where you have standard yearly pricing, you can actually export the prices that you have from last year, make whatever changes that you need, and then import the prices for the new year. As of 1/1, it'll automatically start using the new year prices. All right, so that kind of covers the advanced inventory replenishment and the vendor price management module. At this time, I think we'll open it up for questions. I'm early by about 4 minutes, but I'll give those 4 minutes back.
All right, thank you, Todd. We did have a few questions come in. One being, what can you create a purchase order by? And then they asked about the vendor groups as well.
Okay. So the purchase order can be created for any range of vendors, any range of items, sites, buyers, vendors, or item class. And then again, with the vendor groups, you can turn that on and create those to be anything you want. So you can have a vendor group, which is, 12 different vendors that just belong together the way you do purchasing.
Okay. And someone else asked, if I have vendor minimums, can I keep track of vendor minimums per order, and how can you ensure that I hit those minimums?
Sure. So that was the vendor totals window that we showed down here, and so this is going to keep track of that. For each vendor in GP, you have the ability to set up a minimum order in the options screen here on a vendor. You have a minimum order quantity, and so you can use that. You can also do that in our system by weight or by quantity. So in the vendor pricing details here, which is a window we add, this is where you set up the target order. And as part of the setup, you decide whether that is weight or total quantity.
Okay. Another one was, can you keep track of vendor discounts over a period of time to ensure you hit the levels or volume?
So we do have a module called Purchase Retrospective Discounts, which is a separate module that does allow you to put in items and vendors, and it will keep track of how much you've purchased and how much rebate you've earned for that particular vendor. So it does not create anything on the payable side like a credit memo or anything, but it does create an asset that says that you're owed that amount of money from that vendor as part of a rebate program.
Okay. And then another question was, how are these products licensed? By user, by instance?
Sure. So Advanced Inventory Replenishment and Vendor Price Management are licensed by user tiers. So we have pricing for 1 to 10 users, 11 to 30 users, and 31 and over users. Those are full GP users are what we count. So limited users don't count. And whatever tier one of your companies or your company falls into would be that price. And then a 20% annual enhancement, which covers support, service packs, new releases, etc.
Okay. And then how can you get the true cost of the item purchase? I need the price, landed cost, and discounts considered.
That is a great question that I wish I had a good answer to.
Mhm.
Yeah, landed cost and cost with rebates figured in. We do not have a module that handles that, unfortunately. We have looked at it several times. There's some real challenges. GP is phenomenal in the way it keeps track of FIFO, LIFO cost layers, but it does create some real challenges when you're trying to modify that for things other than the purchase price of the product. So I don't have anything that does that, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, if anyone else has any questions, please submit them now. Or you can always follow up via email. I think that is it. Thank you, Todd, for the insightful presentation and to everyone for attending. We'll see you next
Thank you.
time.
All right. Bye-bye.